page.
Okay, let's play some
blah, blah,
damn
blah,
chess.
I used the language of de-escalation, and I said, I appreciate
Street
you.
whore.
Let me kind of tell you where I'm at, and then
Come
tell
on,
me what you
slut.
think
Start
about
the
that.
damn game.
He came back and said, man,
Come on,
thanks
you
for kind of the
slap-out
high road
slut.
response. I really appreciate you. Kind of here's what I was thinking, but I totally
Come on,
understand.
you fucking
And
slut.
all of a sudden, the temperature dropped, and we became friends. And it wasn't about winning.
God,
It was
fuck
about sort of interacting and discussing and being people. And I've been trying
Start
that
the
more and more,
slut
and
again,
it's
you
amazing
slut.
how often I'm seeing success. Instead of knee-jerking into keyboard
Shit.
warrior mode and trying to win, when it comes to the everyday people, I still
coke
go hard
whore.
at the public figures. You know, the Marjorie Taylor Greens of the world. You know, the
crack
Mitch
whore from
McConnells of the
China.
world will never get quarter from me. I think they're fair game. But in the everydays and the one-on-ones,
Come on, you crack
when I
whore.
might be dealing with someone who is not the devil, I've really tried to change how I
Fucking
approach
crack
them.
whore.
And it has improved dramatically my experiences.
Come on, you
And it's
motherfucker.
improved the conversations I've been having online. I don't know, forgive me, I just kind of went off on a bunny trail there. But it was
You
what was
suck
on my
my
mind.
dick,
So.
bitch.
This is important. I mean, one of the things I'm trying to do with
Yeah, fucking
Podcast
remove that
for
damn
Inquiry
bone out of
is
you,
to
slut.
have intelligent and nuanced conversations
Shitty
on
fuck up,
complicated
bitch. Shitty
and
fuck up.
sometimes
Come on,
controversial
you slap
subjects.
that slut.
Never with rancor, or
Slap that
least,
slut from
never
China,
with
Japan, and the
caricature,
Orient.
but
I mean,
to
the
explore
Orient.
a topic and
You
try and
Oriental
lead by
prostitute.
example of
Slut.
how you can talk about difficult
Move! Or I'll
topics, either
put your
because they're
black ass to
difficult
stall it, even if you're
emotionally,
white.
or they're just inherently complex.
Come on,
and so
slut,
they're
or I'll
challenging to
put your
understand.
black ass to stall it.
And to give people more than just a surface level understanding over the course of 45 minutes or,
Move your
or an
black
hour.
ass, you slut.
Hopefully we're succeeding with that. But I think that's similar to what
Come on,
your
move your
goal
black
is with,
ass.
with the thinking atheist. How would you, how do you see trying to restore reason,
Come on,
de-escalation,
move your
and
goddamn
actual
black ass, you
interaction rather than flame wars into not just into the interactions that you have with others, but as part of the public discourse, and to resist the urge of demonization of someone who dares disagree with you or criticize.
Yeah, it's a balancing act for me. I have worked really hard to shield the thinking atheist content
Come on, you
from
black
drama.
ass bitch.
And every tribe, every group,
You black
every
ass
organization, every culture
fucker.
has seen drama.
Mm,
They've
this bitch
seen
ass
strong
fucker.
egos, strong opinions, conflict, escalation. Sometimes necessary conflict and necessary escalation. I think sometimes you do have to root out bad agents. You have to expose the awful. And sometimes those can be really unpleasant moments. But I've also seen a lot of people who they just go in and they just make it freaking worse. And then they go public, and then someone else does a response blog, and someone else makes a video, and there's a response video, and then there's everybody's choosing sides, everybody's shouting, nobody's listening, and I'm desperate to protect this audience from that. Not with a head in the sand approach, but my listeners and viewers don't show up at the show because they want to hear what so-and-so whispered about such and such, or two egos clashing and colliding
on your ass.
and airing all their dirty laundry. They're not there for that.
Come on, you slut out slut.
To have community, to be entertained and learn things.
You whore.
And I put myself in that camp because the guests I have on, so many of them so much more educated, much smarter than I am. I'm learning along with the audience. It's a place where I'm not opposed to a believer or someone challenging me on the phone or calling me on the show or giving me, some pushback here and there. But it is a culture that is really dominated by kindness. And it's not weakness. It's not acquiescence. It's strong. I think kindness should be strong. I think this idea, again, we're back to the whole culture of cruelty, where some people think in order to be strong, you have to crush others. But I don't believe that at all. I think sometimes the easiest thing to do is to throw a tantrum and break things. I think that's any 7-year-old can do that. To be truly have tempered, mature strength is to find opportunities to lift others.
Move, dick sucker.
And so I have promoted on my show a culture of kindness. When it comes to everyday people, I'm very kind when it comes to people who share my former faith. I am married to someone who believes in God. She's more of a deist, but she came out of a culture where she called herself a Christian. And she is the best person I know. And I think people are hungry for that, to rehumanize these conversations. Because if we don't care, why would anyone listen to what we had to say?
How have you done that? Like, the Thinking Atheist has been around a lot longer than Podcast for Inquiry. What have you done
to
inculcate a culture of kindness in your show and in the community that you have built up over the years?
Well, first,
come on, you flaming
I have made a pledge not to take all of the bait that gets thrown out. Right? I mean,
come on, you whore.
There are people desperate for our oxygen. I see apologists, I see trolls, I see agents of chaos, and they are desperate to jump into this spotlight and cause a stir and get attention, get noticed. They are desperate for oxygen that they want me to feed them. I have made a pledge not to do that. I'm not saying that I don't ever engage people with bad ideas, but in the internet era, if you stop and trip on every pebble, you will never, ever get anything done. The second thing I have done is to lead by example. The tone and temperature of what I do, what I say and the way I say it, warts and all, flaws and all, it's real, but it's also kind. And that affects the podcast, it affects how the website's done, it affects how the social media pages are populated, and that's sort of a top-down thing. The other thing I have done, and I don't know if this is the right decision, is in order to avoid conflict and drama and all those types of things, I work pretty much alone. I've got a few people who have volunteered their time, and I've got, they've been wonderful.
Well, hello, and welcome to Pints with Aquinas. My name is Matt Fradd, and today we have Matt Dillahunty and Trent Horn, who will be debating whether or not the resurrection is reasonable. We plan on taking 15-minute opening statements. We'll do cross-examination, 8 minutes each, and then the two debaters will go back and forth for a little while. We'll do some Q&A from super chatters and patrons, and then closing statements of 5 minutes. If this is the first time you're here, welcome to Pints with Aquinas. Do us a favor, click that thumbs up button, and if you like the show, be sure to share it on social media. Hello, Trent, and hello, Matt. Are you with me?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, good, terrific.
And Matt, I apologize. There was a bit of a confusion about the debate format before. We can just go with the format as it was and just do opening statements and then jump into a 30-minute discussion is fine.
Okay, sounds good. All right, this is great. It's great to have you here. I don't want to bog down the beginning of this debate with big bios, so links in the description below to Matt and Trent Horn's website. Trent, you'll be arguing the affirmative, that the resurrection is reasonable, so you'll be going first, and I'll set the alarm here for 15 minutes. Does that sound good?
Yes, that should be fine.
I hope so, Ross.
God, fucking damn it.
All right, whenever you're ready, begin, take your time, and I'll just click start whenever.
All right.
Holy Ghost.
Well, I'd like to thank Matt for hosting this debate. I'm grateful for the other Matt for participating in it. Tonight I'm going to defend the statement that it's reasonable to believe Jesus of Nazareth rose from the dead. Matt has the burden of defending the negative, that it's not reasonable to believe Jesus rose from the dead.
Holy Ghost.
In order for each of us to defend our positions, we each have to present a standard for what makes a belief reasonable, especially belief in unusual, unrepeatable events. However, being reasonable is not the same as being convincing. You could fail to be convinced by a belief, but still think that the belief is reasonable. For For example, Matt is not convinced of Alex O'Connor's ethical veganism, but I doubt Matt would say Alex is unreasonable for being an ethical vegan. Likewise, Matt's personal doubts about the resurrection are irrelevant to whether belief in the resurrection is reasonable. Instead, Matt has to defend an objective standard for what makes beliefs reasonable or unreasonable. So let me offer 3 tests to see if belief in an unusual event is reasonable. Number 1, does the belief contradict well-established facts about the subject in question? If it does, then the belief is unreasonable. For example, the claim that everyone buried in Arlington National Cemetery physically rose from the dead would be unreasonable because it contradicts the facts about those bodies still being in the ground. But claiming Jesus rose from the dead doesn't contradict any similar fact about Jesus remaining in his tomb. Now, you might say the science of biology shows dead people stay dead, and so the resurrection contradicts this fact. But this isn't a fact about Jesus, it's a fact about human beings in general. Atheists like Matt are often skeptical of universal statements like everything that begins to exist has a cause. So why not be skeptical of statements like human beings never come back from the dead when we are presented with a reasonable counterexample? Moreover, the claim that Jesus miraculously rose from the dead requires that dead people stay dead. That's because a miracle is a supernatural intervention that serves as a sign of God's revelation. Just as an orange life vest is a sign of a survivor in the ocean, because it's so unlike the surrounding blue water, the resurrection could only be a sign from God or a miracle if it was so unlike our usual experience of people dying and remaining dead. But does this mean we have to accept every miracle claim that doesn't contradict a fact about the subject in question? No. Here's test number 2. Is there a lack of evidence we would expect if the event did occur? If there is, then it's unreasonable to believe the event occurred. For example, it's unreasonable to believe Jesus appeared to every person in ancient Rome after his crucifixion because ancient historians would have written about that. But suppose Jesus really did rise from the dead and appeared to Peter, the 12 disciples, James, Paul, 500 others, as recorded in 1 Corinthians 15. What kind of evidence would we expect to emerge after these events? The people to whom Jesus appeared would tell other people about what happened. Some people would believe these disciples and some wouldn't. This process of oral communication would result in the establishment of communities of believers, or churches. The tiny minority of believers who were literate might write about the resurrection, and non-Christian historians who were aware of this group might reference their beliefs but not accept them. And that is exactly what happened with early Christianity. Now, I'm not saying this proves the resurrection happened. I'm only saying that if Jesus rose from the dead as the New Testament describes, then there is no absence of expected evidence that makes this particular resurrection belief unreasonable. But an unusual belief could still be unreasonable even if it passes these 2 tests, which brings us to the final test. Is the evidence for the unusual event just as easily accounted for by a usual explanation? If it is, then it is unreasonable to believe in the unusual event. The claim that the Muslim prophet Muhammad received poetic recitations from an angel doesn't necessarily contradict anything about Muhammad, and if an angel only dictated the story in medieval Arabic conventions, we'd expect the Quran to sound as it does. But test number 3 says there are usual explanations that account for these historical facts. This includes fraud or even mistakenly attributing one's subconscious thoughts to the voice of God or an angel. Therefore, it's not reasonable to believe in the central miracle of Islam, but the central miracle of Christianity is literally a different story. Before I explain why, I must note that in previous debates, Matt has said there is a difference between claims and evidence. He said there is no evidence for the resurrection, only claims about things that happened to Jesus and his apostles. But most historical evidences, nearly all of them, are just claims that something happened, including unusual things. If I told Matt I rode an elephant across the Swiss Alps, he might want extraordinary evidence for such an extraordinary claim. But the only evidence for the Carthaginian general Hannibal crossing the Alps with war elephants in the 3rd century BC is just a claim made by a Roman historian decades after it happened. Yet no major historian doubts this took place, even though historians don't even agree on basic facts like what route Hannibal took. So given this proper understanding of historical evidence, what is the evidence for the resurrection? The most important evidence would be claims that Jesus appeared in a bodily form to groups of his disciples after death. So how could we explain these claims? Well, here are 4 possibilities. 1, the claims never happened and were invented by later Christians as a legendary development. The problem with this explanation is that we have Paul's writings and he had contact with the disciples and even makes this claim about himself. We also have accounts from Luke, who shows himself to be a very reliable historian, and he both documents these appearances and Peter's testimony about the resurrection in Acts 2. Finally, if the disciples never claimed Jesus rose from the dead, then we have no explanation for how church communities based on this belief arose so quickly when other messianic movements fell apart after the death of their leaders. This is why scholars universally agree that an authentic experience motivated the disciples to make these claims. The agnostic New Testament scholar Paula Fredrickson says, "I know in their own terms what they saw was the raised Jesus. That's what they say, and then all the historical evidence we have afterwards attests to their conviction that that's what they saw." I wasn't there. I don't know what they saw. But I do know that as a historian that they must have seen something. Similarly, the atheistic historian Richard Carrier says, "I think it more probable that Peter and James, and certainly Paul, maybe several others, saw something that inspired their faith. I think it most likely that others had these visions earlier than Paul, and that Paul's letters give more or less a correct version of his own experiences, such as his persecution of the early believers." The disciples, maybe they just made the resurrection claims, they made the claims, but they were lying. But this doesn't really explain the involvement of outsiders like Paul and James, who had no reason to lie, or the evidence of the disciples' sincerity and their willingness to be persecuted. Maybe the disciples sincerely believed they saw the risen Jesus, but they were mistaken. They had some kind of grief-induced hallucination. But this doesn't explain many other facts related to Jesus' death. One, we should be skeptical of the disciples being grief-stricken. It's equally likely they were angry they wasted years of their life following another failed Messiah. Moreover, Paul and James were not grief-stricken over Jesus' death because they weren't believers when he was crucified. Two, since ancient Jews believed the resurrection wouldn't take place until the end of the world, it follows that even if they had grief-induced hallucinations, the disciples would have thought they saw Jesus' soul in heaven, not his glorified body on earth. Moreover, given their fierce monotheism, we would expect them to hallucinate Jesus as a man exalted in heaven, and not as the Creator himself, unless Jesus told them he used divine power to raise himself from the dead. 3, Paul tells us Jesus appeared to groups of people, and the closest thing we have to group hallucinations, or mass hysteria, usually involve people psychosomatically experiencing a similar illness, not individuals claiming to all see the same thing that doesn't exist, especially something that didn't conform to their previous expectations. 4, the New Testament authors repeatedly make it clear when someone has a dream, a vision, where they think they've seen a ghost or a spirit. The resurrection appearances in the New Testament all point toward groups of people seeing an embodied, recently deceased individual that would not be the subject of an hallucination. 5, since the resurrection was preached in Jerusalem within a few weeks of the crucifixion, the disciples, or enemies of the faith, could have checked Jesus' tomb to see if they were hallucinating. And the evidence suggests they visited the tomb and found it empty, since the first recorded visitors were women whose testimony was not trusted in the ancient world, a fact whose inclusion makes sense as simply being a recollection of what actually happened. This shows that appeals to hallucinations do not easily account for this case, because it involves outsiders, appearances to groups, evident sincerity, and a general lack of an expectation for the hallucination in question. Therefore, given that belief in the resurrection doesn't contradict a known fact about Jesus, it doesn't lack evidence it should have if it did happen, and no other usual explanation just as easily accounts for the evidence, it follows that it's reasonable to believe Jesus rose from the dead. Now, you could stop there and just say Jesus rose, but you don't know how he did, and the resolution for the debate would hold. Explanations for Jesus' resurrection, for the same reason we should be skeptical of natural explanations for the claims that Jesus rose from the dead. If natural causes are behind them, we would expect these causes to produce many similar resurrection claims. But the resurrection is very unique. The world-renowned atheist Antony Flew once said, "The evidence for the resurrection is better than for claimed miracles in any other religion. It's outstandingly different in quality and quantity." However, if supernatural explanations are allowed, then couldn't we propose them for almost anything and destroy their explanatory power? Well, first, if that were true, atheists who say the universe exists without a cause would commit the same fallacy, because having no cause could explain anything we don't understand. Second, we can rule out many unusual explanations, like God or aliens, as unreasonable because they're ad hoc, or there's no reason to appeal to them, aside from explanatory power. For example, In 1872, the Mary Celeste was found adrift at sea in relatively decent condition with ample supplies on board. The 10 passengers and crew vanished, and historians still don't know why they all got in a lifeboat and left a seaworthy vessel. You could say that God told them to leave as a test of faith and took them up to heaven, or aliens abducted them, but there's no evidence that remotely points in that direction. Now, the ship's log said something about heavenly voices or a ship in the sky. You might have a reason for an extraterrestrial or supernatural explanation, but it didn't. However, the resurrection is different because we have reasons to believe God was involved based on the nature of the disciples' testimony. That means if you're a non-Christian who believe God exists, which is half of religiously unaffiliated Americans, you could consider the resurrection within your own current worldview. And what if you don't believe God exists, and so it seems like there's nothing to cause Jesus to rise from the dead? Well, the resurrection could make you rethink that idea, but I might also argue an argument for the existence of God. This one's called the argument from change. I like it. It goes like this. Change occurs when a potential X becomes an actual Y. We see change all the time. It can be like growth or movement, but no potential X can become an actual Y on its own any more than water can freeze itself or a train car can propel itself. Instead, something like a freezer or a locomotive has to actualize the potential for change. But then these actualizers only change because other things actualize them. So could an infinite series explain why we have change at all? Well, no. Just as an infinitely long train of boxcars would sit motionless without a locomotive, an infinite number of things that must be actualized by something else would be changeless unless there was a cause of the series that's just pure actuality. So just as a locomotive pulls without being pulled, this uncaused cause for the series would actualize everything without being actualized by anything else. It'd be pure actuality. Since the universe contains a mixture of potential and actual, it can't be that uncaused cause. If there's a cause of the universe that's purely actual, what would it be like? Well, if it has no potential, it can't change, because change is potential going to actual. If it's changeless, it would have to be immaterial and timeless, because material temporal objects always change. The cause couldn't be limited in power, knowledge, or existence, because these imply potentials and it doesn't have any potential. The cause would be omnipotent, omniscient, have necessary existence, because it had no potential for non-existence. It would also be all good, because evil is a lack of goodness, and this cause lacks nothing, has no potentiality. Also, the cause would be personal and not a mere force, because the only immaterial things that exist are minds and abstract entities like numbers. But abstract entities can't cause anything. They're causally effete. So this means the ultimate cause of the universe, causally impotent, I should say, must be something that's similar to a mind that exists in an unlimited way. And so for a lot of people, that's what they mean by the word God. Finally, as the debate continues, don't forget about Matt's burden of proof. He has to show it's unreasonable to believe Jesus rose from the dead. So keep asking this question as you hear his opening statement. Matt says belief in the resurrection is unreasonable because fill in the blank. So as the debate continues, I think you'll see that his reasons that fill in the blank are flawed, because they either lead us to one, rejecting many facts of history we already know to be reasonable, and two, they make arbitrary judgments about reality based on Matt's assumptions about the world instead of keeping an open mind about how the world works. So instead of that particular epistemology or way of that term will show up a lot, epistemology. That just means the study of knowing. Like, how do we know about the world? How do we figure out what's really going on, okay? So I have a way of figuring out what's going on when it comes to unusual events. I gave a 3-pronged test for it. And I hope Matt proposes a way of figuring out how to discern unusual events and claims of unusual events. And as I said, he'll try to show that this unusual event, the resurrection, is unreasonable because fill in the blank. Why does he think it's unreasonable? And then you'll see those reasons either lead to rejecting other reasonable beliefs or they end up being arbitrary. Instead, I would argue that you should accept the standard that I've offered and then seriously consider the truth and meaning behind Jesus Christ having risen from the dead and consequently demonstrating the truth of the Christian faith.
All right. Thanks, Trent. Matt, whenever you want to start, I'll click the 15-minute timer. No rush.
All right, thank you. All right, so first of all, thanks for having me here. I appreciate it. It's nice to meet Trent virtually for the first time and to hang out with the Pints with Aquinas crew and fans. Thanks everybody for showing up to this, especially because I didn't do too much to promote it, as I had weird technical issues this week, so let's get started. First of all, it is not my intent ever to offend people, but the nature of these discussions about topics that are at the heart of people's deeply held beliefs often offends. I once believed many of the things that many of you believe. I believe many of the things that Trent believed, including a belief in the bodily resurrection. It's difficult to state something like that without someone interpreting it as, oh, now he thinks he's better than us. I don't necessarily think I'm better than any of you as people, but I do believe that my position is more rational. And if that bothers you, I'd ask you to consider whether you think your position is more rational. Because if your answer is yes, then we're in the same boat and we can argue it out. And if your answer is no, then you need to consider why you are willingly, knowingly holding a view that you consider less rational than the alternative. So how do we go about telling if it's reasonable to believe a claim? And then it's worth noting this is separate from whether or not the claim is in fact true. The claim could be false, and yet you could still have a reasonable belief in it. For once upon a time, it was reasonable to believe that the sun went around the earth, because that's what we saw when we looked up in the sky. It would have been absurd to think that the earth was spinning at an unbelievable rate, and one of the reasons why I would call it unbelievable. And yet that was the truth. So what's reasonable to believe and what's true are separate. Because we may not actually ever have access to the truth, so all we can hope for is what's reasonable. So how do you tell what's reasonable?
Damn it.
Well, there's many answers to that, and they are all problematic because in the end of the day, each individual is going to be responsible for determining what's reasonable to them, and the rest of society is going to say, you're unreasonable, or you're incredibly reasonable. And so we try to work together. This is one of the reasons why we have scientific methods that remove as much of the bias and subjectivity as possible, even though we can't completely remove.
Holy Ghost.
I'd argue in simplest terms, a claim's reasonable if the claim is consistent with what we know to be true and possible within reality. It simply does no good to argue that it's reasonable because it's internally consistent, because that's true for many sci-fi fantasy stories, or at least some of the best ones. So, what does the physical evidence about the resurrection tell us? Well, as far as I'm aware, there is no physical evidence. There's only a story and testimonials. Testimonials about, hey, so-and-so saw this, or this is what happens. If it is true, then the resurrection of Jesus must be the single most important fact in history. And for that fact, we have nothing but hearsay. Now, that hearsay wouldn't be admissible in a court, and certainly the standard, I would think, for adopting the foundation of a religion as true, to the extent that one is willing to conform one's life to it, should at least rise to the level of surviving courtroom evidentiary standard. One might wonder, as I do, if this event actually happened, and there's a good and wise God behind it, why did he leave us with such a paucity of anecdotal evidence and place this event in such a temporal situation as to make it unverifiable and unfalsifiable? Because I'd argue that an untestable claim of a matter of fact, such as this event occurred, no matter what the event is, can never be reasonably believed unless that matter of fact is wholly mundane and when the risk of being wrong is minimized. So if somebody were to say George Washington had a dog named Piggy, the risk of accepting that claim being wrong is fairly trivial. We don't have any way to verify it, as far as I can tell, and it's probably also not falsifiable, because we don't have a time machine, we don't have the ability to exhaustively explore every aspect of it. But the risk of being wrong is trivial. Oops, I thought George Washington... That wasn't right. I guess that's not a big deal. Unless maybe you're on a quiz show in front of millions of people and you suffer terrible embarrassment and a harm to your reputation. And then all of a sudden, believing something like that is a problem. It's important for people to recognize that there's a difference between verification and falsification. Verification is Verification is the concept that we should produce the thing. If we were to say all intelligent beings are on planet Earth, verification, you could run around, hey, there's an intelligent being on Earth, and there's one on Earth, and there's one on Earth, and there's one on Earth. But verifying it exhaustively could be completely impractical, because you would have to search every planet at all times in order to determine that, in fact, all intelligent beings are, in fact, on planet Earth. But falsification is a separate issue. Falsification is whether or not it is, theoretically, able to be shown to be false. And so, while we may never be able to verify that all intelligent beings are, in fact, on planet Earth, we could could, at least in theory, falsify it. Because if we produced an intelligent being that wasn't on Earth, that would falsify the claim. Now, that would show that the claim is wrong. But if we have a claim that is unverifiable, unfalsifiable, it is essentially untestable. And my foundation is that if you have an untestable claim, it had better be mundane, trivial, and consistent with the facts of reality before you should ever risk believing that it's in fact the case. Well, we can't really believe, or we can't argue that it's rational to believe something that we can't test at all. And so we do the best we can when it comes to history. And so when we take a look at history, all we have are reports. Somebody said they saw this, somebody said they knew this person, somebody said this other thing. That's all well and good when we're trying to put together the best understanding of history we can. But we shouldn't be proclaiming it as truth, and we shouldn't necessarily be saying that this particular version of history is particularly reasonable, because history tends to be written by the victors. And so history is always suspect. And there are two quotes from David Hume that are the cornerstone of how and why I go about determining if something is or should be considered reasonable. The first one is that he said, the wise man proportions his belief to the evidence. And all he's really saying is your confidence level in the truth of a claim should be proportional to the evidence that is there to support it. You barely have any evidence for. And similarly, if there's mountains of evidence of something and you're just like, well, then you're not proportioning your confidence to the belief, or to the evidence, sorry. The second quote from Hume, which I'll go ahead and read because it's a little lengthy. When anyone tells me that he saw a dead man restored to life, I immediately consider with myself whether it be more probable that this person should either deceive or be deceived, or that the fact which he relates should have actually happened. I weigh the one miracle against the other. Which I discover, I pronounce my decision, and always reject the greater miracle. Now, what Hume is essentially saying there is it more probable that someone has either been deceived or is intending to deceive me than is true? And when he says reject the greater miracle, that is incredibly important and significant to understand. Hume is not saying accept the lesser miracle. That is not it at all. It is reject the greater miracle. It's not. It doesn't just say, oh, here's two potential candidate explanations that we have at this particular moment in time. Throw the one out that's more ridiculous and accept the other one. No, it's just you should throw out the one that's more ridiculous. And so if we're hearing a claim that someone rose from the dead, when we have no evidence that this sort of thing is possible or probable, then the greater miracle is that someone rose from the dead, versus that someone was deceived or that someone was intending to deceive, that someone was mistaken. Nobody has to lie for any of this. They can just be wrong, or we can just have stories that don't accurately represent the facts at the time. So if a claim isn't falsifiable and there's no way to show it's wrong, we can't reasonably accept that it's correct. And if we're left with no physical evidence about the existence of Jesus or the interactions of Jesus or his death and resurrection, what we're left with is testimony. Now, I'm not willing to dig in on whether or not the Gospels were written by eyewitnesses. I don't think they were. I don't think that most reasonable scholars aren't going to say these are eyewitnesses, but it doesn't matter to me, because even if they were all eyewitnesses, we already know that eyewitness testimony is unreliable under the best circumstances. In this case, we don't know whose testimony, eyewitness second or third hand. We can't investigate it at all. The things that they say happened don't have corroborating evidence. They don't have supporting physical evidence. We don't have any way to question them about their reliability.
Man, Matt Dillahunty is making no damn sense at all.
Talk to them to determine, are these stories accurate? Do they overlap? What we do know is that the Easter narrative from the different Gospels does not line up and cannot be reconciled with the different accounts of it. But in the absence of any physical evidence, we're left with assessing the nature of the claim and the nature of the reports. If it's an extraordinary claim, and it needs to be an extraordinary claim, as it would be really remarkable to say Jesus ate figs for our salvation, the claim needs to be extraordinary because of the narrative. So, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Oh, wait a minute. Is that actually true? Everybody's heard that. I've said it.
I just shit in the pants.
I accept that aphorism for what it means, but not as it's written, because all claims require sufficient evidence. And what counts as sufficient evidence to believe a claim is going to differ based on how consistent that claim is with reality. Mundane claims benefit from having a common pool of knowledge and evidence within reality. We know that figs exist. We know that dogs exist. We know that people name their dogs funny things, and it's not extraordinary to think that somebody might name their dog Piggy. We know that figs exist and are eaten, so it's not extraordinary to claim that Jesus ate a fig unless Jesus didn't exist or figs weren't around at that time. Although we have from the Bible a strange claim of Jesus cursing a fig tree for not producing figs when it wasn't in season, which I would argue isn't something that a divine entity knowledgeable about figs and fruit seasons would do. And it seems bizarre to curse a fig tree, but I can't say whether or not that actually happened. Maybe it didn't happen, and it's just there to teach another lesson. I have a hard time going through some of these things and saying, yes, that's being reported as this actually happened. So what evidence do we have? Copies of translations of copies from unknown sources that may have been but probably weren't eyewitnesses. And even if they had been eyewitnesses, it wouldn't be sufficient to confirm that someone actually rose from the dead. What sort of evidence would we expect for a claim where someone rose from the dead? Depends on the time frame. Sure, back in first century Judea, probably not a lot. You don't have a way to test for sure that somebody's dead. You don't have like x-rays. You don't have DNA. Well, but the question is, if this story is true, then Jesus was divine and God exists. And what sort of evidence could a God provide? Well, a God could provide the best evidence possible, such that there would be no reasonable debate to be had at all. Theists often claim that it's more believable because it's a miracle. It's more believable because the first people to the tomb were women and women weren't trusted. Nobody would put these details in, so therefore they must be true. But that's like saying, that's exactly what the butler would say if he did do it. If it's on par or worse than the evidence offered by someone trying to sell me a bridge, someone trying to get me started in as their underling in a multi-level marketing campaign, or the money that my Nigerian prince has set aside for me, then the evidence isn't strong and no amount of pretending will change that. It is unreasonable to believe it because there isn't sufficient evidence. No physical evidence. Nothing about this claim would pass muster today. There's no body, no tomb, no blood, no sword, no cross, no DNA, no burial rags despite the fake Shroud of Turin, no witnesses to question currently, no crime scene investigators, no findings of fact at all. I understand and appreciate, as I'm a former believer, that there are testimonies here that people find compelling. And I could probably speculate as to what it is that convinces people and what it is that keeps people in belief. But it is not the physical evidence. It is not what is reasonable. It is probably the extraordinary narrative, the emotive, the emotion that people feel and connect with. Fear of dying and not going on to eternal paradise. Fear of being the odd one out when everybody around you believes. I have experienced those same concerns. For the Christians out there who believe this, and you believe all kinds of supernatural, and many of you believe in demons and angels, all of the things that go along with this because you've accepted the supernatural. The only reason this feels to people is because they've already accepted other things that aren't reasonable to accept. We have no way currently to investigate or confirm the supernatural at all. We can't confirm that anything supernatural exists. We can't confirm that anything supernatural interacts with reality. And to say that, well, we've seen the writings of these people who we don't know, we can't investigate, from a long time ago, and it's just so darn extraordinary, and we can't think of a better explanation than it likely happened, therefore it's reasonable to believe it. I cannot get on board with that, and it frustrates me that other people can't see this, because if I were to come to you with a story like this today, if it didn't have the history and the baggage, not of actually being true, but of being convincing enough to foster a bunch of followers, nobody would reasonably, all right, let me take that back. Almost nobody would argue that they could reasonably accept it today. And many of the people who are accepting these sorts of claims are also at odds with science, and it frustrates me that someone could, fear getting a vaccine for fear of being microchipped or it being the mark of the beast, while they accept claims that don't have good evidence.
All right. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Trent. Those were two excellent opening statements. I'm gonna make an executive decision here, if that's okay. We did agree upon it before the game. There was some confusion. What I'd like to do is do 2 8-minute cross-examinations, and then open up this kind of 20-minute general chat between the two of you, because I think that.
Well, Matt, I remember. Well, so this is going to get confusing. Frad, I remember Dillahunty. Sounds like I'm a sergeant or something. I remember Dillahunty saying,
"Oh, you want to abort the game? Well, put your black ass for abandoning the game."
The original email only said just 30 to 45-minute discussion, which I don't know. I guess you're in charge, but I'm fine with whatever the original said. You're the host.
The reason I like the idea of you guys beginning with 8-minute cross-examinations, it'll put one of you in the driver's seat to kind of drill into the points the other was making, and you can be rude during that time. You can cut them off. You can press them, and then maybe.
Oh, you're trying to give me a little leeway here. I come in with a reputation.
Well, see, it'll be good. Well, you'll have 8 minutes to just sort of be full Matt Dillahunty. It'll be great.
I'm fine with whatever. Tear me up, Trent.
Okay, well, I think we'll do that, and then we'll go into 20 minutes. Just the two of you can chat, and we'll see how civil and logical we can both be. But before we do that, I want to say a big thank you to our sponsor, Catholic Chemistry. So, if you are a Catholic and you are single and you don't want to be single, what do you do in a time such as this, where you can't go out, or maybe you can, but it's difficult to meet people? You can go to CatholicChemistry.com. This is the fastest growing dating site for Catholics on the web. My friend Chuck Gallucci actually put it together. It's really well done.
I see a dick in your future.
Once you set up an account, you can actually do video streams with a person directly from the website, so you don't have to exchange numbers right away or something like that. So I'd recommend clicking the link in the description below and checking them out, because it's really well done, and these are kind of serious Catholics. I think there are probably some other dating websites where you can say you're this or that, but yeah, give it a shot if you're single and you're open to the possibility of marriage. CatholicChemistry.com. Now, of course, if you're an atheist, I guess you could still show up there, but no one will prohibit you. All right, Trent, let me ask you one last time, because I don't want you to feel uncomfortable about this. Are you okay doing an 8-minute cross-examine, and then Matt?
8 is fine, my friend.
All right, let's do that then. Let me just set this timer. So, just to kind of reiterate this, especially for the crowd who are watching, and by the way, we've got over 1,100 people watching right now. It's fantastic. During the cross-examination period, the one who is doing the cross-examining is welcome to interrupt the other debater, to press them, to cut them off, and that this isn't considered being rude. This is just so that the debaters can ask questions regarding the opening statements, I suppose, that were just made. And so we'll start with 8 minutes for Trent to cross-examine Matt, and then Matt will have 8 minutes. So Trent, whenever you're ready.
Sure. And Matt, just for common ground, I also am irked by Christians who deny basic aspects of science. I am very irked at those who deny the efficacy of vaccines, the fact the universe is billions of years old. So for find common ground with you, I share your frustration. I want to be reasonable in my beliefs. And frankly, there are Catholics even who believe things about the Catholic faith that I don't share, because I believe they're being unreasonable. So, okay, here are a few questions I have. You said something really interesting. You said 2,000 years ago, it could be reasonable for someone to believe in geocentrism, because that's just how the world appeared. That's the way the evidence is.
Fuck.
Did I hear that right?
Oh!
Well, I don't know if I
Sucker.
2,000 years ago. At some point in the past, it was reasonable. All of the best evidence, the most reasonable conclusion was that the Earth was.
Sucker, you fell for that like a
I'm just
sack
saying, because
ton of.
like 500 years ago,
You
people
sucker, you
that's
fell
when
for that like a
2,000 years
sack
ago
of
is
bricks
pretty
of ton of
informed.
shit.
Okay, so if that's the
What?
case, then is it
Stupid
reasonable for
bitch.
people to live according to this
Shit.
motto? Things are as they appear unless evidence shows otherwise.
I fucked your hole.
No.
What would
So-
you consider faulty about that kind of way of approaching the world?
Spit.
In that case, then, is it reasonable for people to live according to this motto? Things are as they appear unless evidence shows otherwise.
No.
What would
So-
you consider faulty about that kind of way of approaching the world?
It is. It's one of those things that I would say is probably generally true. And by the way, thanks for the comment earlier. I don't want to take any of your time up, but it's been frustrating to me to watch people who deny vaccines and COVID and all that stuff. But so to say things are as they appear unless evidence shows otherwise is the sort of truism that feels right and may be a good kind of starting rule. But we already have, at this point in human history, a good understanding of how we can be fooled. Optical illusions, let's say, and mirages. We know those sorts of things exist. And so now I would say that while generally speaking, we should largely trust our senses and how things first appear, we have to do so tentatively with the knowledge that we might be wrong.
Unless evidence shows us how things appear, that's not the way they are.
Well, it's one thing to say, I'm convinced that this is likely to be the case, and it's another thing to say, I think this is the case. And what I worry about is that this statement would be like, oh, I'm right and rationally justified until you prove me wrong.
Well,
and that's not the way.
Okay, let's go to the meat of this.
Okay.
I've filled in the blank. The belief in Jesus' resurrection is unreasonable because I think you put down multiple things. At the very beginning, you said something like, it's unreasonable because it's not consistent with what we know to be true or in accord with reality. Is there a way you could give me like a 1 or 2 sentence if that's correct or more needs to be added on? Belief in the resurrection is unreasonable because I caught at the beginning, not consistent with what we know to be true. A reasonable belief has to be consistent with what we know to be true, is what you said earlier.
Well, at the closing of my opening, it's not reasonable to believe because there isn't sufficient evidence. There isn't physical evidence. There's none of this. We just have testimonial accounts.
Okay, but part of it is you also said that it's an extraordinary event because resurrections don't happen. They've never been confirmed.
Right.
Okay, how many resurrection claims have you investigated?
Well, just from the Bible, we have Jesus's, Lazarus's, and then all of the saints who rose up out of their graves and marched on Jerusalem in the middle of it. I find no compelling evidence for any of those. There was a resurrection. I'm sorry.
Right. Were you alluding? I'm curious if you have how many. The question is just how many resurrection claims outside of the Bible have you investigated to see if this does happen?
Well, I don't know what we're going to call investigating. I saw a YouTube video that purported to be of a resurrection, but there was no way to investigate it. If there's no way to look into the details of the claim beyond the claim itself, I don't know what investigation can happen. I don't know how to investigate something that supposedly took...
In Craig Keener's 2-volume work on miracles, he lists about 600 resurrection claims. I think about 500 of them are, at least more than 500 are outside of the Bible. Let's say only 5% of them, 30 of them, you could contact witnesses or things like that. It seems like there are these claims of resurrection out there. So is your answer to the question, how many resurrection claims outside of the Bible have you investigated? The answer is 1 by watching a YouTube video.
So I don't know how this is remotely relevant, because what I was trying to say is
Well, it's relevant, Matt, because you're saying that the resurrections don't happen. It's an extraordinary event. It's not consistent with reality, and that's a claim. But I'm wondering, what's the evidence for that claim?
What is the evidence for that claim? If resurrections were known, and we would have scientific journals on them, people would be getting Nobel Prizes for demonstrating resurrections. People would be coming on the news to say, hey, here's a resurrection, which is what happened with the YouTube video that was purportedly a resurrection. I'm not a resurrection investigator, but of the ones Craig Keener investigated, how many resurrections did he confirm actually happened?
Well, he's providing the evidence there for other people to look at. So I'm just curious, you say it doesn't happen, but there are claims out there even today, but they're not investigated. Do you believe those claims, Trent? Do you believe those claims? You can ask me in your cross-examination, Matt. That's fine. Okay, here's the next one. You say that we don't have sufficient evidence for the resurrection, so that's why it's unreasonable to believe in it. What would sufficient evidence for Jesus' resurrection look like?
I listed the thing. It would be nice to be able to show that we have good reason to think that a person existed, that they died, and that they rose afterwards. Something other than just a story and claims of that. Is there physical evidence for this?
Okay. Is it fine then? Is it reasonable to believe that Jesus was crucified under Pontius Pilate?
I don't think so.
Okay, so do you think that all historians in the world that teach at major universities, it's unreasonable for them that they believe Jesus was crucified under Pontius Pilate?
For them to believe it? Perhaps.
Yeah.
Perhaps it's unreasonable for them to believe it. For them to teach it as this is what is believed is not problematic.
No, I'm saying that, so you're saying it's unreasonable to affirm that Jesus was crucified under Pontius Pilate. This is
I'm
what
saying
happened.
I am not convinced, I am not personally convinced that that's the case, but that's not what we were
I'm
here to talk about.
I'm not interested in what you because you agree there's a difference between what would convince you and what is reasonable to believe. Are there any things out there? Well, let me ask you a question. Are there any things that you don't believe, but you think it's reasonable for other people to believe them?
People at different times, yes, as I already alluded to. But no, I of course I think I'm reasonable.
Okay, so no, I'm not saying you're not reasonable. I'm saying there are other... Sorry, we might be running out of... That was to keep me on track.
Did you want to finish that question, have Matt respond, and then I'll let him go?
No, like I gave an example in my opening statement. Like, at least from what I saw with your engagement with Alex O'Connor, you do not believe a person... What's wrong?
What the hell does Alex O'Connor have to do with this? You've mentioned him twice. He's an atheist? Well, the discussion wasn't about... Okay.
What I'm trying to find is that there is a belief you're not convinced of, but you wouldn't say is unreasonable. Do you think ethical veganism that Alex endorses is unreasonable?
Yes. And I was getting ready to get to that in my response.
Okay, all right. So but yeah, all I wondered was, because there are things I reasonably disagree with others. I don't know if you do, but it's your turn.
All right, Matt. I'll give you 9 minutes. Start whenever.
Oh, yeah, no worries. So it's the first time I've had an advertisement in mid-debate, especially one for a dating site. And since I'm neither Catholic nor single, I'll just skip it. But that was kind of cool. So I wanted to thank Trent from the start because he said something that was incredibly true and that other people frequently get wrong in his opening, which is my position is not to show that it's not that it's not reasonable to believe that it did happen, and not to show that it's reasonable to believe that it did not happen. I don't have to be convinced that it didn't happen. I just am unconvinced that it did. And so on the issue of Alex and whether or not his ethical veganism is reasonable, no, I don't think it's reasonable. Of the claims that Craig Keener, since you referenced him, found about resurrections, how many of them was he able to confirm actually occurred?
God damn it.
Well, I don't know, because I haven't spoke with him about how many he believes happened. I think some are related to him.
How many do you believe happened?
Fucking damn it.
I don't know. I've heard a claim. There's one by a guy named Simon Kimbangu in 19th century in Africa who had a reputation for raising people from the dead. That Robert Price cited as an example of having evidence
dumbass.
similar or less than to Jesus. And that's a possibility. But I'll be frank, I haven't investigated them thoroughly because I'm not setting out to debunk them. They could have happened. They couldn't have happened. It doesn't really change my major views on things. So I haven't really set out to say they don't happen. But I'm open to them having happened. It's quite possible.
Okay. Except that resurrection stories are at least likely happening now? Or that resurrections, sorry, not resurrection stories.
It's possible, but I think that it would be very infrequent.
How do you know it's possible?
How
do you know it's possible?
Bitch.
Because Jesus rose from the dead, and
you
so
don't know that.
that means
that's the thing we're debating. You don't get to assume that. How do you? If your belief,
I showed you.
Hang on. If your belief that resurrections are happening now is based on the fact that you think Jesus resurrected, that doesn't mean that your belief is reasonable. That just is a cascade of reasonableness.
Well, no, because I gave an argument for why it's reasonable to believe Jesus rose from the dead based on the evidence provided. And so if he rose from the dead and he's divine, he could have power to work miracles today or throughout history.
So you're basically saying that you're willing to accept a claim of a resurrection as reasonable without any physical evidence.
Well, what kind of physical evidence would a resurrection have, especially one in the past? We would just be trying, when it comes to a claim
all
of resurrection...
resurrections are in the past. Everything is in the past.
Right.
I'm asking you, are you willing to accept a claim of resurrection as reasonable in the absence of any physical evidence?
What do you mean by physical evidence?
Well, did we have, doctors' reports on the cause of illness and death, and then a period of time where they were confirmed to be dead, and then a period of time where they were confirmed to be living again after that, with medical examinations? And how do you know you're not just being conned?
Okay, so you're saying to be reasonable... I think I see you're tracking here. For it to be reasonable to believe in resurrection, you'd have to affirm a person did exist, and they died, and they were seen alive after their death. In some cases, to prove
the
that death
important
happened...
points there. I was specifically asking about with a lack of physical evidence, and the physical evidence that I would be talking about is medical scientific evidence about that individual. It's not that, it may be the case.
That wouldn't be physical evidence. That would be another kind of testimonial evidence from someone like a doctor who says, "Yep, this person is dead," because I'm very familiar with what constitutes a dead person. Now, modern medicine is fairly new, so in older resurrection accounts, like the one we're currently debating, we would have to rely on other kinds of testimony. And I think it's very likely, basically what happened is that Jesus did die from crucifixion based on all the details and all the accounts related there.
So you're willing to accept that an individual rose from the dead with nothing more than just testimonial evidence?
Well, how do we know that anything happened in the past?
I don't know why you won't answer the question. I'm asking you, are you saying you're willing to believe a resurrection with nothing more than testimonial evidence?
I am willing to believe that Jesus Christ died by crucifixion under Pontius Pilate.
That is not the question I asked. Why is it every time I ask a question, you go back to something that's not the answer? Is it my time to ask questions or not? I thought this whole thing was to be able to interrupt, to redirect. I'm willing to let you answer if you will answer the question. Objection, Your Honor, non-responsive. Are you saying
I'm going to answer. I'm just not going to give your answer.
Are you going to keep trying to talk over me while I'm asking the question again?
Go ahead.
Are you saying that you are willing to believe that a resurrection occurred based only on testimonial evidence?
Suck my dick.
Will you allow me to answer the question sufficiently? I promise I can do it in less than 30 seconds.
It's a yes or no question, Trent.
Yes, I believe that people can testify to things that happen in the world.
That's not what I asked. I said, are you willing
if you want to be interesting, fine, yes, fine. Okay. If you only want to answer no, then yes. It's not interesting, but okay.
I'm not here for interesting. I'm here to find out what's reasonable. And here's the crux of it, which we can have this discussion afterwards, because I don't have any follow-up questions after this. And that is this. You are willing to accept that an extraordinary, miraculous event occurred based only on testimony, and I am not. That's it. That is the foundational difference between our epistemology. I will not accept that the physical understanding of the universe was suspended for an individual based only on testimonial accounts. It is unreasonable. That is how you get conned. That is how magicians fool you. No, I didn't, but it's my time, isn't it?
If you want to pontificate,
I did, and now I'm done.
Okay.
Well, Matt, how would you like to proceed?
All right, let me...
It's just discussion time, but I was just trying to get the...
Yeah, we'll move into 20 minutes of discussion. I want to kind of maybe kick it off by asking each of you a question. Would that be okay? Trent, do you think that uniformity of the laws of nature provide evidence against miracles?
I think... Well, actually, no. The uniformity of the laws of nature is necessary for something to be a miracle. In my opening statement, I gave the example of a life jacket. Like, you notice an orange life jacket because the water around it is totally different. So if you didn't have uniform laws of nature, we wouldn't have any way. The word miracle actually comes from a Greek word that means sign. So if God were to make a sign of his intervention in the world, it'd have to be different from the natural world around us. Otherwise, we just say, oh, well, that's like how everything goes. We wouldn't notice it. So I don't think that it's evidence against it. I think rather that we have to think, okay, well, I agree with Matt. We should try to figure out how the world is. But the world is a strange place. And so there are things that upset the apple cart a bit. And this may be one of them. And so I say, is this an exception to a general rule we have, just like we have discovered other exceptions? For example, for 1,500, and I promise to be done. For 1,500 years in Europe, swans were always white. That was their uniform experience. But then there was testimony in 1697 that black swans have been found in Australia. But it wasn't like, oh, we can't possibly believe that. It's like, oh, we might need a little bit more. But if it's sincere, reliable testimony, that actually shows the world's very different from what we know. And I think the same can be done for the resurrection.
Matt, why don't you respond to that question, then I'll ask you a question and have Trent respond, and then you guys can get into it.
Oh,
Well, this is. I just want to ask each of you one question and give you both time to respond, and then I'll let the two of you go at it. So I just wanted to give Matt a chance to respond.
Whisper, no.
Actually, I'm in agreement with Trent. The law, in order for something to violate the laws of nature, there needs to be order in order to recognize the thing that's different. That's not controversial at all. I think it's absolutely hilarious, though, at all the people in chat who are claiming that I'm angry and rude when during my questioning time I'm just trying to get a question across. It's funny.
No, that's my message to everyone in the chat. That's just how it is. But actually, I mean, I could drive down.
He should win that damn game.
I wish I could drive to Austin. I'm only 3 hours away from
here. Stupid.
Beer or whatnot. It's just, folks.
Once the quarantine's over, do it.
I will.
Once this quarantine's over, I'm up for my second inoculation in like 2 weeks, I think.
Stupid.
Yeah, we can sit down in the studio and record. Well, I'm older, so I'm older and diabetic, so I got my appointment.
All right, here's a question for Matt. I'll let you take some time to respond, and then Trent, you can respond to him, and then I'll let the two of you feel free to have a conversation. Matt, can testimonial evidence alone make a belief reasonable?
On its own, no. But testimonial
depends
evidence
on who's telling the truth.
Is always viewed within the pool of things we already understand. If you say, I got a new puppy last night, that is reasonable for me to accept because I know that puppies exist and people get them for pets and there's nothing extraordinary. Everything about your claim is consistent with what I already know and understand to be true about reality via experience and evidence. So it's not, you could view that as, your testimony alone is enough. But that's a colloquial thing. That is us saying, I will take you at your word. But the truth is, when I say that, I'm saying, I will take you at your word considering all the mountains of evidence I have about how the universe already works.
Trent.
Okay. What I would say is that in the vast majority of cases, testimony is sufficient. But in some cases, we might need a little bit more. So I think, for example, look at the resurrection, I think we have very good testimony. So we have testimony going back to St. Paul, who was an eyewitness of the original disciples. So we have good evidence to believe, and even atheistic scholars, as I cited, like Paula Fredrickson and Richard Carrier on this, would say that the original disciples claimed Jesus rose from the dead, and this was motivated by a genuine experience that they sincerely thought this had happened. So yeah, I agree, like a testimonial is something, one person's testimony for the mundane. For something that's extra mundane, I might need more testimony. If it's a group of people and they're willing to suffer costly punishment for affirming this belief, then that starts to raise the likelihood the belief is true. Most things we believe about, nearly everything we believe about the ancient world, for example, is based on testimony. Like I cited in my opening statement, if you went on Matt's conclusion, and he even said it was not reasonable to believe Jesus was crucified, you're going to abandon ancient history and scholarship. It's not reasonable.
All right, I'll let
I said I wasn't convinced it was reasonable. I didn't say it was not reasonable.
All right, we have 18 minutes. I'll let you guys have a conversation, and then we'll have 30 minutes of Q&A after that. So if you're in the live stream right now, just save your questions until that time. All right, guys, go.
Well, how do we do this without... I enjoy talking with you, Matt. You're fun.
I do too, and that's gosh, I wish people could understand that more. That just because there might be a minute of raw doesn't mean that we're So you talked about having more testimony, and I'm on record as saying the plural of anecdote isn't data. So it doesn't matter how many testimonials you have; that alone is not going to be enough, and unless you view that in the broader stream of things. And the way I've explained this is that, like, my mom. Okay, screw it. I don't like doing this, but my mom is a fundamentalist Southern Baptist Christian who believes she has seen demons.
Okay.
Now, I'm happy to believe that my mom thinks that she has seen something, but that doesn't mean that I'm justified in accepting that that she's correct about what she's seen. Same with people who are abducted by aliens, people who claim they're abducted by aliens.
Well, so it sounds like your epistemology. Because if you notice my opening statement, I didn't use like natural, supernatural. I used usual, unusual. Because like alien abduction, that's a natural occurrence.
Well, what's the difference between there are plenty of things that are unusual in my life, but usual and unusual. Unusual is like that's a wide spectrum to go from it's unusual for somebody to win the lottery, even though it happens all the time.
Well,
somebody was raised from the dead.
I guess what do alien abductions? Resurrection claims, it seems like what they have in common is they're disputed and they don't happen very often. That seems to be like just basically what they have in common. So like what would we use to determine when would it be reasonable for someone to think they had an encounter with an extraterrestrial, I guess?
I don't know what it would take. See, here's the thing. We're talking about two different things. What would it take for, if I had an experience that I was convinced was being abducted by aliens, that is independent from what it would take for you to believe that I actually was abducted by aliens.
Okay, I mean, what if you told me you had been abducted by aliens and you called me and I talked to you at 9 o'clock at night and you're in Texas, and then you call me at 3 a.m. and you say I was abducted by aliens and they dropped me off in Tokyo. And
hang
there's
on.
An airline ticket.
You just invented something that has potential physical evidence that's completely different. You added something to the story.
Well, I'd be adding more testimony. There'd be people who would say, I saw Matt, your Japanese fans be I saw Matt Dillahunty in Tokyo. And,
It's not just, I saw Matt in Tokyo. We could prove that I was in Tokyo.
Okay, so let's just say we have the physical evidence there. Would you then be allowed to go through this reasoning process? I can't provide explanation for how I got to Tokyo, so it must be an extraterrestrial explanation.
No, that's a fallacy.
Well, then how would that circumstance with the physical evidence convince you you'd been abducted?
No.
It wouldn't.
No, if my position is I don't have an explanation for how this happened, I don't get to invent one, and I don't get to claim it's aliens or angels or gods or demons or anything. If I don't have an explanation, then I don't have an explanation. And as much as that sucks, that's the truth.
So even if there was Independence Day spaceships over the Earth, would that... I'm picking aliens because I'm just saying this isn't a natural, supernatural question. I'm trying to figure out, you say we don't have sufficient evidence for the resurrection, but... if you can't tell me what the sufficient evidence is, what would be sufficient evidence? I guess, here, I'll ask this question, and you can rip it apart if you want.
Okay.
Is your position that you have no idea what sufficient evidence for the resurrection looks like, but you're confident you haven't seen such evidence?
Correct. In the same way that this is asked to me quite often about, what would change your mind about God? And my answer is, I don't know what would change my mind. Because it would be arrogant of me to presume that I have the understanding of reality to be able to tell the difference between a real God and a fake God, or some being that's just powerful enough, or a strong delusion, or an evil demon, or whatever else. Sure. But if there is a God, that God absolutely knows what would convince me and has not provided that evidence yet.
Okay, but then here's my follow-up question. If you don't know what the sufficient evidence looks like, you have no idea what it looks like, how can you be convinced you haven't seen it? Because what if you failed to recognize it? It'd be like if I said, I have no idea what a hygrometer looks like, but I know I haven't seen one. Seems like you've left yourself open to, you've missed it because you don't know what it looks like.
I would never say, if I don't know what a hygrometer looks like, I would never say I know that I haven't seen one.
Okay.
I could not say that I haven't seen something I don't know. What I'm saying is that, so in all the opportunities for somebody to present sufficient evidence, what they have presented are falsities and testimony. There's no physical evidence. There's nothing that would rise to the level of being admissible in a courtroom.
Okay. Well, at least in a courtroom, and I've heard you make this analogy before, and I think it's problematic for claims related to history, because a courtroom is not actually ordered towards finding the truth. There are biases in the courtroom to prevent the punishment of the innocent.
Correct.
So I mean, we can't do double.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry.
I didn't mean to.
Well, we can't try somebody twice, even if we get new evidence. Like it's slated so that we'd rather let a guilty person go free. It's not just about finding truth. It seems like I'm wary of those kinds of analogies. I think we should say, well, what does the evidence point to this in the past? And for me, go ahead.
That's the foundation of my epistemology, which is what I pointed out in the opening. This whole notion about the bias in the courtroom to avoid punishing the innocent is exactly the same thing as I have a bias in my epistemology to avoid being conned and duped into believing something that isn't true. I want to believe as many true things as possible and as few false things as possible. And you have to have both prongs of that, because if you want to believe Go ahead.
My problem with that, Matt, it'd be like if we said our courtroom is set up to maximize punishing the guilty and minimizing punishing the innocent. Those are actually contradictory. You can't do both of those. It seems like
No, those aren't contradictory. How is that contradictory?
For example, if you wanted to maximize punishing the guilty, we would get rid of double jeopardy.
No. It would be, I want as many guilty people to be convicted and as few innocent people to be convicted as possible. That is the direct analogy to my epistemology.
Right, but then it's like, okay, should we have double jeopardy? That would prevent innocent people from being punished, but reduce our ability to convict the guilty. Much the same with your epistemology to say, well, I'm going to maximize my true beliefs and minimize my false ones. It seems like your epistemology this is my honest appraisal of it. I want to minimize believing false things.
Trent, I apologize. My internet froze. I need you to back up about a sentence or two.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
God.
That it minimizes. I need the train of thought to get on the tracks again. Hold on. That it minimizes believing false things, even at the cost of losing true things. Like take unusual historical claims. Like the Jewish historian Josephus says 1,000 soldiers committed suicide at Masada to avoid being captured, and he's actually our only source for that event happening, and he's a very biased source because he's a traitor. Is it reasonable to believe these kinds of things when we only have testimony?
Well, my confidence in the claim is proportional to the evidence, and in this case, when we have one biased source, my confidence in that claim being true is very, very low. I wouldn't even say I'm convinced that it is true.
Stupid.
Okay. Why do you think though? So it sounds like you're taking not just an epistemology, but a historiographical approach, like how we do history, that is just totally different from every other historian in the world.
I'm not a historian, and I don't care what methods historians use.
Okay, so then would you say that you're not qualified to tell us what's reasonable to believe in historical matters?
I can explain to you what I do and don't find reasonable and why. I'm not a historian.
No.
Okay, what I'm saying is though, what is reasonable for people to believe about the past? Whether you're convinced of it or not, it doesn't matter. You can say, well, I'm not sure this or that, but there seems to be evidence and historical scholars in agreement on this. And I'm trying just to go with the bedrock here, that Jesus was, just starting with Jesus was crucified. He died by crucifixion. It's not just they believe it. Every historian in the world who teaches at a major university affirmed
what a strange clarification. Every historian who teaches at a major university, while you're excluding the two people you've referenced, who I disagree with, by the way, Carrier and Bob Price, who are historians who don't think that Jesus existed. I disagree with them on that, even though people keep trying to saddle me with that. My thing is,
I included the qualification, Matt, because there are many, and I'm not saying this about Richard or Bob or anything like that, but for example, there's lots of people who go, like, there are young Earth creationists who get PhDs in geology.
yes,
But they're not teaching, except for Kurt Wise at Harvard. They're usually not teaching at major universities. I use that clause.
Well, now we've gone to usually.
What?
Well, now we've gone to usually because you had to add a clarification.
Okay, well, that was one. That was just one.
Yeah,
well,
and now you got one outlier.
There's more people in academia, Matt, who believe the Earth is less than 6,000 years old and think Jesus was never crucified. It's a fringe view. It's rejected.
Damn it.
And I know you don't hold that view, but
that's an argument to ad populum, because the fact that people are convinced of something is not a measure of whether or not it's reasonable. Reasonableness. So first of all, neither truth nor reasonableness is determined by the number of people who believe it or how convinced they are.
If you knew someone who is skeptical of getting a vaccine, would you think it'd be good evidence to them to say that, like, all the major medical associations in the world say it's safe and effective?
I'm sorry, one more time?
If someone with a family member was hesitant to get the COVID-19 vaccine, would it be legitimate evidence to tell them every major medical association on Earth says this is safe and effective? Would that be good evidence to share with them?
Yes, because medicine isn't history. Medicine is science.
Is history
it's good evidence because it's science, not history. It's a different category.
Okay, so you don't think we can have... what about historical sciences like geology?
That's not history. That's science.
Well,
just because it covers a period of time. I mean, everything covers a period of time. Evolution covers a period of time. That doesn't make it historical science. It's science. You're putting that on there because you want to smuggle history in. Well, history isn't a science.
Okay. Let me ask you, and if you have questions for me, you can. I don't want to I got one here.
I'll come up with some at some point. But this is a good conversation.
Sure.
I would say that we kind of diverted from the courtroom thing, because on this notion of wanting to convict as many guilty and as few innocent, which is the same as believe as many true and as few false things as possible, neither of those set up a contradiction, because one category is about guilty people and one category is about innocent people. There's no contradiction there, because what I'm saying both with the epistemology and with the courtroom is this: I want my internal model of reality to match reality as best as I can, and I want the justice system to be as just as possible.
Sure. So then the question is, should we have double jeopardy? Like, we don't try somebody twice for the same crime?
I'm not sure whether or not I'm opposed to having a no, or well, hang on. The no double jeopardy seems to me to be a case where guilty people are getting away with it, and so I would prefer a justice system that didn't allow guilty people to get away with it. The problem,
you'll see this coming out.
The problem is that you could keep innocent people going back over and over and over and over again, and while they may never be convicted, you're now wasting their time. And so, in that sense, we do this knowing, okay, both with the epistemology in the courtroom, so when I say as many true and as few false, as many guilty and as few innocent, I do it with the recognition that there will never be perfection, that there will always be I'm always going to believe something that's false, and I'm always going to not believe something that's true. But we can get to a point where we have, based on the information available and a consideration of all the evidence, the most reasonable view possible. And for me, when it comes to claims about the supernatural, not once has anybody demonstrated the truth that there is something supernatural or that it can interact with reality in any way. It's all just claims something. Where is the testable? Where is the testable supernatural claim?
There's an evil entity in the house.
You are about to see real people.
I was terrified beyond belief.
Reliving horrifying paranormal encounters for the first time.
I was so completely overcome with terror.
As multiple witnesses remove any shred of doubt.
Completely over
Normal encounters. For the first time.
I was so completely overcome with terror.
As multiple witnesses remove any shred of doubt.
Take this damn picture, slut.
For the first time.
I was so completely overcome with terror.
As multiple witnesses remove any shred of doubt.
Thank God it wasn't just me. I buried this for nearly 30 years.
Be prepared to be afraid.
Story 29, Lori, take 1. Marker.
I'm looking to ear his rook.
My memories of my grandparents' house are all very...
With a
funny memories of my grandparents' house are all very frightening, nightmarish
Boop,
memories.
I touched her head. I touched her
I dreaded
head.
going over there.
I touched her
I never
head.
felt comfortable. I always felt like someone was watching me. I was always on edge, waiting for something
With
to happen.
to touch
Lori
her
didn't know how to explain to other
head.
people the sense of foreboding that the house gave her.
I remember I was in the house, sitting in the living room, and I heard someone laughing upstairs. And I knew there was no one up there, and I didn't see anyone, but I could feel like there was someone there.
With to touch her head.
The laugh itself didn't sound like a happy, funny, that was a great joke kind of laugh. It was more of a sinister, I'm going to get you kind of laugh.
Lori wasn't the only one who was sensitive to the atmosphere in the house. Her cousins noticed it too.
When it was not nice outside, we would be sent into the basement to play.
Touch her head. With to
The heater was in the far
touch
back
her
corner, and as
head.
long as I can remember, we would joke with each other that that's where the ghost was buried. Because next to the heater, there was a depression in the floor. It was a very old kind of linoleum floor over
With
dirt,
to
and that
touch
part of the floor
her
kind of sunk down lower
head.
as the house settled, and it was the size and shape of a grave. It was very creepy.
Up until now, Lori had just been a visitor at her grandparents' house. But that was all about to change.
My parents divorced, and we moved to my grandparents' house. I was already not happy because my parents divorced, but the thought of having to live in that house was like my worst nightmare coming true. So I felt like I was being sentenced to like some kind of long prison sentence. When we moved there, I noticed that no matter what time of year it was, there were certain areas in the house that were always freezing cold. One of them being my bedroom. Didn't make sense because my room got all the morning sun. It was on that side of the house. So it should have been bright, cheerful, and really warm, but it wasn't.
Lori tried to ignore the strange experiences, but they continued.
There was this old
I see a
rocking
dick
chair.
in your future. I see a dick. Dick.
I would hear a noise, and I'd look over and the chair would be moving. Back and forth, back and forth. And then it stopped, like dead stopped, just like someone put their feet down on the floor. And then I would look back at the chair and it would be rocking. The air in the room just got that feeling like something was about to happen. I hated that chair. That chair just gave me absolute creeps.
With two.
And if I got
touch
up
her.
to go tell my grandmother, it would stop.
Head.
My grandmother was a very religious person, so we had a lot of pictures throughout the house of religious themes. Now, I specifically requested and wanted a picture of the Blessed Mother in my room. I was hoping that it would lessen the appearances of whatever it was.
But that would not happen.
The picture literally fell off the wall. The nail was still in the wall, so it didn't fall out of the wall. It was lifted off the nail. The hook was still in the picture, still intact. I would be getting dressed for school in the morning. I would take my clothes out of the drawers. I'd push the drawer back in. I'd put my clothes on. I'd turn around. All my drawers would be open. I'd push them back in. I'd go to the bathroom and come back in my room. All the drawers were open again. My personal belongings would always be moved, misplaced. My mother and my grandmother would tell me that it was my imagination and that I needed to stop all this nonsense because I was scaring the younger kids.
A spirit can pick and choose most of the time who it wants to communicate with, and sometimes it will find people who are more open to see it. And I've always found out, in my travels of investigating that children are more susceptible to seeing spirits. And chances are that child has seen something that your average person aren't able to see, or at least don't want to see.
Things got much more intense in my room specifically. I started to hear scratching in the walls. Like someone was stuck in a wall and trying to get out. Like intense scratching. And I would feel like there was someone right over my back.
Lori Hull had lived in a state of constant fear since moving into her grandparents' house.
I started to hear scratching in the walls. I would feel like there was someone right over my back, and you would feel like you could not breathe when that would happen. Like it would take all the air out of the room. It was like a suffocating kind of feeling. It scared the life out of me. I was sure I was gonna die. It eventually kind of receded back towards the bottom of the bed.
So far, only Lori had experienced weird phenomena, but that would soon change.
At one point, I was about 16 or 17. I had invited one of my friends to stay over because we were out and he had missed the last bus home. So I said, you could stay in my room and I'll sleep on the sofa. He came downstairs in the middle of the night, and we'll never forget this. Woke me up where I was sleeping on the sofa, and he said, I'm walking home. I cannot sleep in your room. He said that he woke up and there was something dark, like right over him. And he said he swore it was going to like smother him or do something to kill him. When that happened, then I knew. I was like, okay, it's not me. I'm not crazy. This is really actually happening because I never told anybody that. And for someone else to come down and say exactly what happened to me, it was scary, but I was in a way happy because I knew that was the moment I knew I wasn't crazy.
God damn it.
My friends and I decided that we would try to find out more about who it was and what it was trying to do. We decided to use the Ouija board to try and contact the spirit in the house. It started to really move more, I guess, purposefully. We had asked for a name, and we seemed to be speaking to a woman who called herself Fran. One of my friends got really scared and didn't want to do it anymore.
God,
so she
fucking damn
left the circle. I wondered if Fran was the woman who I heard laughing on different occasions and the one who was opening the drawers. Fran said that she had lived in the house. She indicated that she had committed suicide.
If you were somebody that conjured up spirits, or you were into, magic or whatever you were doing, and it was of negative influence, and now you go into somebody else's house, and a spirit would see you as a threat.
One night I was asleep, and something had woke me up. There was a woman just standing there. And then I saw that she had a rope in her hand.
Was she an Uzi Man woman? With Uzi?
I saw that she had
Emily.
a rope in her hand. And then there was... And something had woke me up.
I gotta touch her head.
Asleep.
Spit, spit,
and
spit.
Something
spit,
had
spit,
woke me up.
Spit.
There was a woman just
I'm
standing
touching all
there.
those poor women's heads.
And then I saw that she had a rope in her hand. And she was just staring at me.
God fucking damn it. God bucket. God bucket.
And she would put the noose around her neck
God
and pulled
fucking
it.
damn it. God bucket.
I was moving towards the edge of the bed, and
God
when I got to
fucking
the edge
damn
of the bed and went to put my legs over, she picked her head up, lifted the rope off of where it was, and stepped down. I was so completely overcome with terror, I took off
God
down
fuck
the
it.
stairs.
God fuck it.
After several horrific experiences,
God,
Lori Hull
fuck
was
it.
desperate to escape the terrifying spirits in her home.
And I looked at my grandparents' room, which was downstairs, and I started yelling for them to wake up, and she said, "They're not going to wake up." I put them to sleep.
Lori was so scared she stayed awake all night.
My grandparents were awake in the morning. I asked them if they had heard anything last night. They said no.
The next day, she knew she needed to find help.
I was really overwhelmed by what I had experienced. Now, one of my friends knew all the things that had been going on in the house. Her mother belonged to kind of like a spiritual study center, and when I told them the story, they were all just silent. Now, they felt that the spirit that was in my house was not a human spirit. They felt that it was more of a demonic kind of spirit, and there are specific ways for dealing with that. And they did caution me to not try to communicate with it, and gave me different methods for trying to protect myself spiritually. It was still there, but it didn't touch me.
Bitch.
It didn't do as many things. And as soon as I was 18, I was out the door of that
You're
house.
gonna lose that
I
whore.
moved to, my friends were moving to Virginia Beach, and I was gone. You know, I'm still trying to recover from what I experienced in that house. I think I will be haunted by those experiences for the rest of my life.
When there is more than one witness to a paranormal event, it can prove that the experience is genuine. But when the phenomenon is truly terrifying, multiple witnesses provide little comfort.
Story 27, Frank. Take one. Marker.
This is the first time I've really publicly told the story. I met Marcia, actually she was a waitress who worked for me at a restaurant.
As the time went on, we, became friends and we started dating.
It would take at least an hour with traffic to go see her, so that was getting pretty old.
We discussed him maybe renting something up this way towards me, so he wouldn't have to have that long drive at night. After he would leave, my house, I was still living at home.
We found a home that was for rent in Mount Tabor. Actually, it was a roommate wanted type of ad, and my roommates were only there during the week.
So it worked out perfectly for us because he was very close. He didn't have to sleep on my parents' couch.
Frank settled into his new home and was excited about his relationship with Marcia.
4 to 5 weeks after I moved there, I was in the living room and the curtains started to flutter. The house was an old house, but we had put the plastic on the windows, the kind you hit with a hair dryer.
Stupid! Cause that was stupid!
There was no reason why the curtains would flutter because the windows were sealed. And then the temperature really dropped a lot, and I could see my breath.
Now it makes me get
it's almost like I was
stalemate.
walking into a cold spot.
When dealing with anything to do with cold spots, you have to be careful. First thing you do is you definitely do a temperature check to see what the readings are. What we look for in a cold
If
spot
I can't
is an
win, you
extreme
can't
drop.
either.
So you're in a house, it's 65 degrees, and then within 3 seconds of taking another reading, it drops down to 45. Then you have something. Spirits will definitely drain a lot of energy rapidly, and we've usually find out to be somewhere around that 20-25 degree droppage that we could probably pretty well guess it's paranormal.
I could not figure out what it was, where it was from. I could not explain it away. I tried. I looked at everything that would possibly cause it, vents, anything, and I could not explain it away.
And that wasn't the only strange occurrence.
I I would be in my room and I would hear the radio go on downstairs. And you can hear the channels changing. There was no dial stereo, and you can hear the channels changing, you know. It would stop on a big band type channel, like 40s music. And I'm like, well, who's playing 40s music? So I'm looking around. I'm on the second floor. I check my roommates' rooms. They're not there. So I start to go downstairs, and as soon as I get close to downstairs, the music stops. It turns off. I went back upstairs, and I just started thinking that something is going on here. A few minutes later, I'd hear the radio go back on again.
Opening the phone.
And I'd go back downstairs again, and as I went downstairs, it would go off. When I was in my room watching TV, there would be some knocks and some bangs, sometimes some scratches, and then I would hear almost like voices, like talking, mumbling, and I kind of like, I was listening to my TV, and I heard it off behind me, like in the hallway. So I turned off my TV, and it would be a faint mumbling. So I thought maybe somebody was home. So I went out to the hallway, and there was no one there. It stopped. The activity started getting a little bit more intense. We had a landlord, and the carpeting at home was very old. And we had tried for months to try to get the landlord to pay for the recarpeting the downstairs. He finally said yes, and he had to recarpet it. After he had to recarpet it, things started getting a little bit more intense.
Spirits have a hard time with change. If that spirit lived there at one time and it got renovated, it still feels like it's theirs, especially if that energy is still hanging around that specific location.
Frank no longer ignored the strange events, but he was curious about his housemates and whether they had similar experiences.
I didn't see my roommates a lot. We would be two ships passing the night, so we didn't have a lot of communication. And I never really said anything to them when I did see them.
Hey, how you doing, man? How's it going? How's everything? Things good.
There was a moment where my roommate Greg was in the kitchen, so we're kind of talking, hey, how was your week, that type of thing,
Joe, did you see that? No, man, what did you see?
All of a sudden I see him glance up with his eyes past my shoulder like he saw something. And I said to him, what's the matter? He says, well, I saw a shadow go up the stairs. I said, thank God it wasn't just me.
It always helps to have other people validate what you see or what you think you see. It helps you because as an investigator, you kind of lose that sense of investigating when something happens because you want to believe that the supernatural exists, or you want to believe that that particular home or where you are is haunted. So when you can get 2 or 3 people validating that, it definitely helps in a case for paranormal activity.
With confirmation that the others were seeing the same thing, Frank finally confided in Marcia.
I just fucked up your cast, you slut.
I didn't believe any of it because I was a big skeptic, and I just really didn't believe him. So I just kind of let it go. I said, you must be crazy, and we'll let it go.
The next morning, Marcia was no longer a skeptic.
So we were laying there watching TV, and
all of a sudden, we heard water running.
Yeah. I walked down the hall, opened the bathroom door.
trying to Jenna has Uzi arms me.
Frank Regillo had experienced many strange events in his home, but his girlfriend Marcia was skeptical. Until now.
I didn't believe any of it. All of a sudden, we heard water running.
Did you hear that?
Yeah.
Sudden, we heard water running.
Was pit. Boom. Miss Pit. Miss.
I walked down the hall, opened the bathroom door.
Miss Pit.
I walked down the hall, opened the bathroom door. Shower was on, and all the water was running.
Miss Pit.
And so I turned everything off, left the door open, walked back down the hallway. 6 or 7 minutes later, all of a sudden you hear shh, and she goes, "No way."
It was on again. I said, "This is unbelievable." I said, it can't be true. It just can't be true.
Miss Pit. Miss Pit.
She beelined out of that house as fast as she could.
Because I was just, at that point, I said, I'm not staying here anymore.
Come on,
Frank
you
was quickly
slut.
losing patience with the old house.
All of a sudden you hear this big crackle of thunder and the lights go out. I'm saying to myself, well, is it just my house or whatever, or it might just be the neighborhood? I wasn't sure, so I went downstairs.
I think you fucked
Went
up.
down to the
cuz.
root cellar, because in the root cellar is where the circuit breakers were. Found the breaker box. As I'm doing this, it got very cold.
Come on, you
I feel
slut
something
that
behind me.
slut.
Two red lights, eyes, I don't know what you want to say they were. I headed right for those storm cellar doors that opened up into the backyard. I pulled the lever over, flipped them open.
All I need to do is dick at these that pole on this side.
That was the most terrifying to me.
Ah!
I just could not stay there any longer. I mean, I was willing to do anything just to get out of there. I said, I'll pay out the lease, I have no problem with that, but I'm moving. I didn't care, I was just glad to be out of there. We went in there, moved everything out in a matter of an hour, and I was gone. I was so glad to be out of that house. It's beyond words. It was really, it was just beyond words.
Being chased out of your home by an entity is a chilling experience. Some people have no choice but to stay put, even when their entire household is being terrorized.
Story 25, Cheryl, take 1.
My name is Cheryl Arnott. I'm from Lakewood, Pennsylvania. Ken's my husband.
Let me touch her head.
From Lakewood, Pennsylvania.
Hers too. Boop.
Ken's my husband. We met several years ago online, and then we just decided that we were going to get together and get a The house that we found was It's a ranch style. And I fell in love with it right away because the kitchen size is what I wanted. Moving into the house were myself, Ken, my son, and my daughter. It meant a lot to me to have my family close. And I felt safe because of the area that we were in. It was home. It was going to be a place to share our memories, going to be a place to share our lives.
Cheryl and her family had everything they wanted, but it was early days in the house.
The first time that I really noticed anything off is I gathered up the laundry. As always, I did it once a week, but I was separating the laundry, and then all of a sudden I just get this feeling like I'm not by myself. It's like I'm not alone. And so what I did was I just kind of scooted the basket out of the way, and I looked around the corner down the hall. I'm thinking somebody's there, but I don't see anybody. You might catch a glimpse of something out the corner of your eye, movement, and of course the movement makes you turn your head to look, but when you turn your head to look, there's nothing there, but you know your eye caught something because something over here moved. I'm thinking, this is crazy. I'm thinking, okay, you're tired, something. There has to be an explanation.
Spirits will typically show themselves in various ways. It could be through a cold spot. It could be through catching something at the corner of your eye if you can see it that quick. And a lot of times we like to call it, or I like to term it as a phantom draft. All of a sudden you'll feel a breeze, whether it just blows by you or maybe something moves, or a curtain or an object, just to let you know that they're there. They will use that. So it's typically just another form of communication and a manifestation of energy.
But Cheryl's search for answers would only bring more questions.
I went into the bedroom, and then I felt something brush against my leg. And so I'm thinking it was my cat. So I want to push the cat away, and when I look down, there's nothing there. So it wasn't my cat's. And it was just rubbing against my leg like it was insistent on getting my attention. You just don't, you can't, words can't even describe the feeling that goes through you, because you're thinking, this is totally unreal. Why is this shouldn't even be happening. It was a scary feeling because it's a contact. It's like a physical contact. Something touched you and you can't see what touched you. It's just mind-boggling. I didn't tell anybody about it for a while. First person I did tell was Ken. He just didn't believe what he didn't experience or didn't see.
Cheryl tried to ignore the strange events and move on with her life.
Bonnie moved in with us 2 or 3 years later after we bought the house. Bonnie is like a mother to me. My kids even call her Grandma Bonnie. She's been a great grandmother figure and a great mother figure, and I kind of lean on her heavy at times.
It was just like one big family, and I enjoyed their company, they enjoyed my company. It just felt like we was helping each other out. They ended up making my bedroom down in the basement.
As the family settled into their new living arrangements, the strange phenomena started up again.
We were in the kitchen one day playing Scrabble. It's daylight, and nobody's thinking about anything except for the game. Okay, Bonnie says, oh, I'm thirsty. So she gets up and she goes over to the cabinet. She takes out one of the cans. Pretty soon, I look up and this thing moves.
Cheryl Arnott had tried to ignore the strange events in her home, but then her husband Ken and family friend Bonnie witnessed something they could not explain.
Pretty soon, I look up, and this thing moves.
The can was turning around on its own.
I'm there poking Ken.
I was very scared.
I couldn't even talk. I was so stunned. I was like, and I'm pointing and poking and pointing at this thing, saying, yeah, that's all I could get out. And then about that time, the pop can goes, shh. I'm scared to death because I'm thinking any minute this pop can is going to fly. And I'm not going to get hit by it. I'm in running position right now. When all three of us saw it, we just definitely knew there was something in that house. And something wanted our attention. But who, what, why, where, all of that, I have no clue.
The fear that everybody had was just what was going to happen next.
The family was now on edge.
The activity in the house after that Scrabble game happened was like, if you were walking from like the kitchen into the living room, you might see something coming, and you think Ken, because the shadow, whatever it was about as tall as Ken, which is, he's like 6'2", and you'd see it like coming towards you. You'd turn to look thinking Ken, and when you turn to look, it was nothing there. It was always black shadows.
They searched for ways to stop the unwanted presence.
I was second guessing the house. Really, a move wasn't really, it was not really a big option because we had everything we had tied up into the house. It wasn't like you can just say, okay, I'm done with you, house, goodbye. You can't just put everything in your purse and go out the door with the keys. We had nowhere to go.
Bonnie would soon regret her decision to move into the house.
I was sitting at the table. I was all alone. Everybody else was in bed. And I kept hearing this noise behind me. And I thought it was one of the kids trying to sneak up on me. And I noticed shadows. So I got paying more attention to that.
It was a precious moments that I collected.
Now if I can just dick up this
fallen
poem.
on the floor and shattered all over the place. Except for the little angel on the inside. And that stayed intact except the head. The head was like chopped off.
Now if I can just dick up the poem.
I knew at that point something was there, but I never at any time thought it was friendly. If it's friendly, it's not going to give you a feeling of fear and terror and wanting to get out of there. Something friendly won't do that. My son went to his room one night, and he had just got into bed with his girlfriend at the time. Her name was Nicole. He hears a woman outside of his bedroom door telling him, "Kill Nicole." Like she would do that for about 5 minutes, he said. Scared the daylights out of him, like it went anybody. It was like, how does this person or this thing that's outside of my door, how do they know her name? How do they know anything? What else do they know about me? What else are they going to say?
As morning arrived, Cheryl thought she was safe.
I went over and I got in the shower. And I thought, okay, I'm going to get my shower and then get out of here. I got stuff to do, and I was planning the day in my mind. And I'm standing there, soaping my hair. And I felt a hand. And
Syrup Spear.